All right. Thank you for coming back. It's good to talk to you. Today we are going to be talking about the second generation. We're going to cover Ailey, Nikolai, and Cunningham in this lecture. We're dealing with chance and change, really the second generation of choreographers um, after the modern pioneers. And so chance and change. We're really looking at, like I said, Ailey, Nikolai, and Cunningham. We'll get to Taylor and Halpern perhaps next week. But right now, Alvin Ailey, Alwin Nikolais, and Merce Cunningham are what we're going to focus on today. So this group of dancers really had their heyday between the end of World War II in 1945 until like the 1970s. And sort of during this time, modern dance rapidly developed into an accepted dance, art, and educational form. Dances became expressions of contemporary thought and of personal expressions of individuality. Yeah, it was really a generation of choreographers who did away with content and narrative or like emotional structures, like big productions that involved myths and legends and stories and emotional characters. Um, these dancers, these choreographers were rebels of abstraction. That's what I've mentioned here. They wanted to take their choreography really in a different direction than their predecessors, and they really felt restricted by the work of the four pioneers, whose work was seen as cliche or elitist in some way. The second generation of dancers were just not concerned with dramatic and mythological themes like their predecessors were. Um, Really, here, movement itself. They wanted to move, and movement itself, movement for its own sake, could become the focus of the dance. This really meant abstraction of ideas. Now, there was really a sense of focus towards the shift in focus towards abstraction. Abstraction is not just a shift in the choreographic structure, but really a shift in their philosophy about dance. So abstraction is really like a higher order of thinking where one isolates common characteristics between different things and reduces the complexity by recontextualizing the idea of whatever it is into a new thing. So taking abstract parts and putting things together. Abstraction doesn't attempt to sort of represent a narrative, or abstraction doesn't attempt to display an accurate description of reality, but instead uses shapes and colors and motion and forms and gesture to really achieve an evocative effect, a thing abstracted from the reality, the real thing, but still has a profound impact. So many of these dances that were created during this era between, World War II and the 1970s, many of the dances became known as abstract dances. The choreographers themselves were part of the avant-garde. They were the forerunners of this unconventional movement that would become postmodern dance. But at this point, so these are the dancers that became the postmodern, or became the forerunners of postmodernism. And there were many collaborators. Um, Many artists collaborated, many visual artists and musical artists collaborated with modern dancers and choreographers of this period. Um, the social, economic, and sort of political times supported experimentation and even rebellion in the arts. And these choreographers really wanted to connect with the common everyday person. They weren't really looking for elitist cliche or you know, they weren't looking for anything elitist. They were really looking for everyday surroundings, everyday things, everyday people. The dancers and choreographers experimented with pedestrian movement, with environments, memory, multimedia, non-literal, non-narrative forms. They used math. They used chance operations. And they used task-oriented activities to sort of spearhead this movement of dance in a new direction than what it had been before. And then I wanted to show you this, read this from Donald McKayle. I always demand a certain vibrancy, an inner vitality that communicates through the viscera, not through the mind. The mind is not dormant, but it does not hold sway in all areas. The senses are reached first, the reflection afterward. And this is what I am here for in my classes, or in my dances rather than, this is what I am for in my dances, whether they have definite plots or if they're more abstract in their concept. So this is what Donald McKayle is saying, and he became one of the pioneers of modern dance as well. One of these, there were many African American modern dance pioneers, and he was definitely one of them. And you can see here that he's not really trying to talk about a plot line or a story, but really to get beneath the skin, to get to the vitality that communicates through the viscera, through the skin, and not directly to the mind, but rather, to something deeper and something quicker and something more, perhaps more direct. Now, there were, and like I mentioned, the African American modern dance pioneers. There were many of them. So right now, today, we have people like Nicholas Lecter, Kyle Marshall, Johnny Mercer that are working. But before them were these pathfinders like Robert Battle and Ronald K. Brown, who was a big influence on me. Bill T. Jones, Jawale Willa Josala, B.B. Miller. These were all major sort of pathfinders and people that have companies that really made the way for many other people. Before them were people like Catherine Dunham and Pearl Perimus and Taylor Beatty and Donald McKayle and Alvin Ailey. And today, so I've picked out Alvin Ailey. I mean, I could talk about any of these, but I'm going to pick out Alvin Ailey today to talk about. Amazing pioneer, amazing, one of the giants of 20th century concert dance. Alvin Ailey, his work really fused theater, modern dance, ballet, jazz, and his memories of growing up in Texas. It fused these dance forms with a black vernacular that created this like hope-filled choreography that even to this day continues to spread global awareness of Black lives in America. Like, amazing work. Alvin Ailey was, let's talk about him a bit. He was born in Texas, 1931. Now, what was going on in 1931? That was like the height of the Great Depression in the United States. He was born in the Deep South in Texas, in the violently racist, segregated South. His father abandoned his family when he was like 3 months old, and he and his mother worked in the cotton fields, and they worked domestically, like cleaning white people's homes. And he traveled with his mom from town to town in Texas looking for work. And unfortunately, when he was 5, his mom, he witnessed his mother being raped by a white man. It was a horrible, scarring experience. So his mom, looking for a better life, they moved to LA in 1941. So he was 10 years old when they moved to Los Angeles, and he settled in there. And he saw, in 1946, he he saw Katherine Dunham Dance Company. I mentioned Katherine Dunham earlier as one of these greats. Well, he saw the Katherine Dunham Dance Company perform at the LA Philharmonic Auditorium, and this awakened something in Alvin Ailey. His classmate, Carmen de Lalvalil, asked him to come with her to Lester Horton's dance studio. And that's around 1949 that he started to get serious about dance. And he loved it. He connected in at Lester Horton's dance studio, and he studied all aspects of theater and became immersed in what was going on there. And we'll talk about Lester Horton and who he was next week, but Horton really became Alvin Ailey's mentor. Now, the Horton School was one of the first racially integrated dance schools in the whole of the United States. And in 1953, Alvin Ailey joined Lester Horton's dance company as well. But unfortunately, that same year, 1953, is the year Lester Horton died. He died rather suddenly, and not only had Alvin Ailey just joined his company that year, but nobody else wanted to lead the company. There were still bookings, there were still shows to do, there were still performances, and so Alvin Ailey took over the leadership of the company that year. So right away, we see Alvin Ailey as a leader, as a company director, and he took over his mentor's company. And that was 1953, but a few years later, 1958, is really when Alvin Ailey stands on his own. He founds the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, and it was a success right from the start. Alvin Ailey and a group of young black men and young black dancers performed at the 92nd Street Y. So he had moved from Los Angeles back to New York in that time and founded this dance company. And the company started touring on what Ailey called station wagon tours. They toured around very cheaply, as rustically, as quickly as they could. And his mission really was to present his vision of honoring black culture through dance across America, across the United States. So his technique was really a mix of Graham spirals, because he did take some classes in the Graham School, but Horton technique and a mix of Graham spirals and these long ballet lines and this Afro-Haitian energy and this jazz. It was a blend of all of these things, and it was wonderfully athletic and beautiful to watch, and it still is. It's amazing. If you get a chance to see the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, you definitely should. So it's one of the first works that came here in 1960. It's called Revelations. Now, this work is the signature work of the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. To this day, every concert they do, they dance this dance. Revelations is done. It's a half an hour long. It's one of the most popular dances in the world. Period. It really is. Alvin Ailey was 29 years old when he choreographed this dance to American Spirituals. It's like the whole piece can be seen as kind of a look of the story of African Americans moving from slavery to freedom. In this piece, Ailey drew upon his childhood memories growing back in Texas, black people, the church, spirituals, the blues. It's gorgeous. And it's filled with imagery about the emotional underpinnings of his memories, his experiences of going to church with his mom in the 1930s and 40s. And this piece launched the career of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and gave the company international acclaim. By 1962, the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater was chosen to go on an extensive tour to the Far East, like into Asia, and as part of JFK, the president's special international program for cultural programs. Um, 1965, Judith Jamison joins the company, and she is a really incredible. Judith Jamison, she became the most recognized and lauded member of the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, and she danced for the company for 15 years, and she served as Alvin Ailey's muse really during the time. And in 1989, when Alvin Ailey passed away, she took hold of the reins as artistic director. Judith Jamison took over the company after he died. Right now, Robert Battle claims that title, and it was handed to Robert Battle from Judith Jamison. So really, the Alvin Ailey Dance Company has had, in its history, has had three directors of the company: Alvin Ailey, Judith Jamison, and then now Robert Battle. Another important figure is Miss Sylvia Waters, who joined the company like in 1975 and performed with the company for about 6 years, and now she runs a company called Ailey 2. I invited her to work with some of my students at the last place where I worked, and she was just incredible working with them, and just has a grace and a giving nature to her, and it was a wonderful experience. So let's see, the Cry here. This is another breathtaking work. It was originally choreographed on Judith Jamison as a birthday present to his mother and as a gift to all Black women everywhere. It is a stunning piece of work, and I would really and I believe I've put both of these in Moodle for you guys to watch, or on the online platform there for you guys to watch. So a couple of other points. 2008, the United States Congress passed a resolution designating Alvin Ailey Dance Theater as a, quote, vital American cultural ambassador to the world. And they declared that December 4th is Alvin Ailey Day. So it's a national holiday for Alvin Ailey. These are two of his most recognized and most signature works, but he has there's a ton of works, but these are some of my favorites in particular as well. So here's some of the images of Alvin Ailey's work and his dancers, they are just incredible. Amazing, passionate dancers that could really do anything. Super strong, super athletic. Oh my goodness. This is one of the images from Ivan Butte, one of the sections in the piece called Revelations, the signature work of the company. Yeah, so we could watch those, but I hope you will take a chance to see those pieces. All right. Alwin Nikolais. Let's talk about Alwin Nikolais. He was born in Southington, Connecticut. He was the youngest of 6 children. He studied piano at a young age and went on to become a professional musician. Like, he would play music for the silent movies. He was born in 1910, lived until 1993. And so early on, he was playing music for the silent movies. We'll look into him just a little bit. In 1933, he went to a concert by Mary Wigman and was attracted to the percussion instruments that accompanied her works. He was inspired to study dance after seeing her perform, and he studied dance at the Wigman School there in Hartford, Connecticut. And while studying dance and percussion, he also worked as the director of the Hartford Parks Marionette Theater, which is an interesting little side note because that little theater and those puppets that he was designing gave him ideas and inspiration for what he would later do on a much larger scale. So early on, he like 1935 to 1937-ish, he was working as this Hartford Parks Marionette Theater, and he was studying dance at the Wigmont School. He also would go to the Bennington College Summer Dance Festival, which, we talked about earlier, became the American Dance, later would become the American Dance Festival. And he would go there to study under the four pioneers. He studied under Hanya Holm and Martha Graham and Doris Humphrey and Charles Weidman, and he studied under all of them. But of all of those four pioneers, his greatest influence was Hanya Holm. Her work really resonated with him. And he kept coming back and kept studying with her. And then he would go back to Hartford. So in 1937, he founded his first dance company. Well, his company and school where he taught and choreographed. And in 1940, this was a significant point for him. In 1940, he was commissioned to choreograph his first ballet. It was called, or his first dance, right? It was called 8-Column Line, and the piece was a success. And the audience, and there in the audience was an abstract painter named Salvador Dali. You may have heard of him. And there was also the Ballet Russe choreographer, Leonid Massin, was also watching. And he got accolades from this piece. It was called an 8-Column Line. But then, 1942, he was drafted. He was asked to serve. He was in the Army and served as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. So that's a pretty good position, actually. And I believe that this time in war really greatly influenced his ideas regarding abstraction and his dynamic use of space. And I don't just say that offhandedly. I mean, I was at a lecture given by Murray Lewis, who was Nikolai Lewis's by Alwin Nikolais' partner and his long-term collaborator, Murray Lewis. So I was at this lecture by Murray Lewis, and Murray was talking about that, about Alwin Nikolais' time in the Army and walking in Europe through these bombed-out cathedrals, and then how that affected his sense of space and how the immensity of space and how it struck him as a choreographer and as a mover and as the sense of expansiveness. It just affected him. So he brought that back with him into his works. So after World War II, he relocated to New York City, where he studied with Hanya Holm. He continued to study with her. And soon he became Hanya Holm's assistant in New York City, and also Hanya would go to Colorado College, where she taught in the summer. And he integrated his war experiences into his art, like I was talking about. And in 1948, he had a big opportunity. He became the director of the neighborhood playhouse here at the Henry Street settlement. And this is where he established his school and his dance company. And it was during the 1950s that Nikolai created a whole bunch of new works. And he wrote his electronic score, and he started the Nikolai Dance Theater. Yeah. He met with Murray Lewis, the man who was giving the lecture that I was talking about. And Nikolai and Murray Lewis connected, hit it off, and established a long 40-year collaboration where they worked together. Lewis was a student of Nikolai's, and he was his lead dancer, and really became Nikolai's partner. And I say Nikolai Lewis a lot because they formed a company together, the Nikolai Lewis Dance Company. Murray Lewis established the Nikolai Lewis Dance Lab in New York City, and he helped to establish the Nikolai Lewis Dance Company, which toured nationally and internationally for many years. So the Nikolai Dance Theater became one of the leading companies in the United States from its first appearance at the American Dance Festival in 1956. By 1968, the company had had a successful European tour, which led to many artistic relationships with some of the world's greatest theaters, especially France. They just loved him in France. And his company toured the world over. Nikolai is known as the father of multimedia performance. This is because his choreography was unique. He was not just a choreographer, but he was also a composer. I told you he's written music. He was a designer. He believed in a total theater experience. I'm talking shape, sound, light, color, fabric, technology, motion. It was all sort of given its own, all of those were given as much emphasis. So he wouldn't just focus on the movement or the dance. He would also focus on the fabrics and the lighting and the design. So it became one theatrical experience. He called this style decentralization, because he was interested in breaking the performance elements into these parts that were all individually important. Lighting, sound, movement, sets. It was all this whole concept, this gestalt of theatrical experience. His critics thought it was anti-human, or that it was dehumanizing to his dancers, sort of turning his dancers into objects. But he didn't see it that way. He just thought the dancers were part of this bigger picture. A very important part of it, but nonetheless part of the picture. And he defined dance this way. He said, the art of motion, which left on its own merits, becomes the message as well as the medium. Yeah. So that the dance it's like motion for motion's sake too. It is the message, the motion is the message, and it is the medium with which that message is given. Yeah, so that is what dance is. So his intent was really to create this sort of microcosm for audiences so that they would make their own interpretations of what his works were. He wasn't interested in telling a story necessarily, but having interpretations of the work. He also was not interested at all in showing emotion on stage. Rather, he just wanted to show raw motion. Motion, not emotion, is what he was after. Does that make sense? He used a combination of motion, color, light, sound in his works, and employed theater technologies to set the scene. So using still and video projections to really enhance the theatrical performance. So you couldn't tell where one body part blended into another at some points in his pieces. Nikolai gave his dancers masks and props and costumes that would extend and stretch and reach their arms and extend their arms and legs well beyond, what they could reach themselves. Their extensions allowed the dancers to sort of transcend themselves and their physical boundaries. He is recognized as one of the forerunners also to the postmodern movement. And in 1980, he created really his 99th work, Scheme, for the Paris Opera. I told you they loved him in France. Some of the important works that he created were, so here's some of the images from his works. Kaleidoscope here, which he created with a kaleidoscopic imagery and ideas. Imago. Tower was a piece where they the dancers build this huge tower from metal gates that eventually sort of crashes down. This one here on the right, that's tensile involvement. I had his company members come and set this work on my students before. It's a where these elastic bands stretch from one corner of the stage to another. It's an amazing piece and they get tangled up in it and expand. So this is like one of those pieces that just I think about him walking through the cathedrals of bombed out Europe, and I think about this piece because of the reaches and the lines and the diagonals that extend all the way to the corners of the proscenium stage. Imago, Nomenon, that was that one. Imago. This is the piece. These are, you know, sort of an imaginary civilization, and they're populated by these fantastic creatures, and they wear these odd extensions on their heads. You know, it's a civilization. It's a comment on society. How should we live is kind of where he's after. Interesting, fascinating comments that he makes with his movement. And I would love for you to go to just watch those pieces, tensile involvement and the Imago in particular. Yeah, we won't watch them now, but I want to see them. I have posted them as well. The last figure we're going to talk about today is Merce Cunningham. Now, Merce is from the Pacific Northwest. He was born in Centralia, Washington. He attended Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle, where he met his longtime collaborator and partner, John Cage. 1940 to 1945, Merce Cunningham danced with the Martha Graham Dance Company in New York City, and he also studied ballet. And in 1942 is really the time when he started collaborating with John Cage. Cornish College of the Arts, met his collaborator John Cage, who was also a musician, and became his partner. 1940-45, he danced with the Graham Company, and he started choreographing his own works. And they would go up to Black Mountain College in New York, in North Carolina. And that's where he started really presenting work during the summer months. And he would teach and would choreograph at a residency there at the college. And he presented his first solo concert in 1944 with John Cage. And it's here that he really established, at the Black Mountain College, that's where he started the Merce Cunningham Dance Company in 1953. And it's in the 50s here that he's using chance operations. You see, there was a book called The I Ching, which is perhaps, it was translated to English. And the first English translation arrived in the United States in about 1951. Now, the I Ching is called the Book of Changes, and it's one of the oldest Chinese classic texts. It's over 3,000 years old. I mean, if you remember, Ruth St. Denis sort of scratched the surface of Eastern culture and at the turn of the century, bringing modern dance inspired by Eastern culture. Well, the I Ching was something that really had an impact, and Taoist philosophy was something that really had an impact on. I see. I put 1041 now. It should be 1951 here. The I Ching was something that, and Taoist philosophy was something that Merce Cunningham and John Cage both really were attracted to. Some of the things that John Cage is famous for is his notions about silence. He said a few things that John Cage said. Here's a couple of quotes from John Cage. Silence is not silence. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of non-musical sounds. Another thing he said was, with your vision, you're always at the edge of your world. And with sound, you're at the center of your world. And I really believe that's true. I've thought about that a lot. Um, the way and oftentimes in my dance classes, I'll have people close their eyes and to really focus with their sound as well, to sense where they are, to find their sensory perception other than just their vision. Another thing he said is this: when one's body is young, one looks pretty. When one's body is wise, one looks beautiful. And there's a difference between pretty and beauty. So it's something to think about there. Merce Cunningham technique. What is it like? If you've ever taken a Cunningham class, well, it's centered on the movement of the spine. The spine acts as a spring. It can coil, it can twist, it can turn. Directionally oriented, this technique has often been considered balletic, somewhat balletic. It's held, it's shape oriented. The torso has a calm presence. And his dances, they're like devoid of story. There's no story to them. They're devoid of meaning other than what they are themselves. They are dance itself. This is simply movement for movement's sake. Yeah. There's this immediacy in which Cunningham's dances are firmly rooted here in the present moment. We are doing what we are doing. And they're performing work that they don't know necessarily what they're supposed to be doing uh, until they get out on stage. New variations of each dance at each performance that they do. So they're not performing the same dance over and over and over again. It's new, it's fresh, it's vibrant, and it's firmly rooted in the present moment. And the randomness of the I Ching helps place them there. So one of the things the I Ching does is it provides this randomness by allowing you to cast, almost like casting dice, and you end up with these hexagrams, and there's like 64 of them, and so if you roll the dice to find out what sound goes next or what movement goes next. And that's kind of the way that works, that each performance becomes spontaneous and a new permutation of the movement that you may not have put together in this sequence before. In 1964, these events, Merce Cunningham started creating things that he called events. Now, first they happened in museums, and then they were in gymnasiums, and in dance studios, and then outdoors. And by 1999, he had created 500 of them. The dancers in these things, they would sometimes know the dances, but not the sequence or the parts that they would perform until they enter the dance space. And this was really a way of destabilizing the order of a piece. Movement, sound, and decor, they all coexist and remain separate elements. So it's very similar to what I was saying from Nikolai Lewis. Nikolai's work is decentralization. And Cunningham's works are decentralized also, but just in a little different way. Now, Nikolai's work, he was trying to control all of it. Nikolai wanted to direct the whole experience for the audience. Whereas Cunningham is like, he's going to let the fates do that. He's going to let the roll of the dice control. He's taking the control away from the dancers and away from the choreographer and out of his own hands, and giving it to the fate about what, the role of chance happens to be. Whatever is a Taoist way of thinking. So even still, all of those things, the movement, the sound, sets, it all coexists, and they're all separate, and they're all delivered differently. So John Cage might go off and make the music score at one time, and Merce Cunningham would go and make the dance and the choreography, and they wouldn't come together until opening night. And that's when the dancers heard the music for the first time, was on stage. Can you imagine? Can you imagine doing that? Where you don't know what what music's going to sound like until you get there. Well, yeah, it's pretty amazing. This juxtaposition of ideas. His choreography is concerned with space and with time. He choreographs with a stopwatch, right, in his hand, and he clicks it. This is going to happen for this amount of time, and then it'll go on until that happens, and then, it's about space. You travel center stage, and then you move to the stage left, and then you come back. So you know the pathways, perhaps, as a dancer. The relationship between the dance and the music is one of coexistence. They happen at the same time. The interaction or juxtaposition of movement and light or sound just becomes expressive in and of itself. It's not trying to say something or communicate anything, but the movement is what it is. Chance really provides opportunities for choice within the sequences without the artists conveying some kind of idea. There's a detachment that's present, that's characterizes, Merce Cunningham's works. Now, his collaborations with John Cage and visual artists like Robert Rauschenberg, they sort of changed the concept of what dance should be or what dance could be. The other thing about Merce Cunningham was that he was really involved in dance and technology. He was an avid worker into film and video. He was pioneering emerging platforms of dance, film, and video. His first collaborator was Charles Atlas and later Elliot Kaplan. They made biographies of him. They made works with him. His interest in technology also led him to work with a computer program called Dance Forms. It was a software in which you could use it with, you could choreograph dances on the computer. And so his dance piece called Trackers is one example. I think it was choreographed in 1991. Trackers he choreographed it on the computer and then told his dancers what to do based on what he made this computer program do. Another example is Biped, which was in 1999. So through the 90s, he was choreographing this way. Some significant dance works of his. Let's see. So here's some of his pieces. You can see the torso, the spine, the head-tail connection, the upright, this almost looks balletic here, with leg stepping through passe, symbolic, reaches. Let's look here. These dancers are strong. They could do just about anything. There's not necessarily an emotional connection. Like they're partnering. They're not looking at one another. They're doing their own thing. They're in their own time. They're moving. This is Merce Cunningham here, actually, when he was a dancer. So here are some of the works that were important, I would say. Winter Branch was choreographed in 1964. This was a scary, claustrophobic piece. The dance was performed, half of it like in silence, the other to Lamont Young's composition of two sounds. Extremely loud, repeated sounds that make up this work that just assault the audience. In the dance, bodies crawl and fall or jump out, and then the lights go out. Bodies scurry in the darkness while flashing beams of light focus on the audience, or like the lights shine out directly into the eyes of the audience, or it looks like there's a car passing. It's this electrical lights, it's random light. It's not like this romantic, moody light, romantic light. No, it's like dark and scary and claustrophobic, and the dancers are wearing these dark clothes. They're like sweatpants and sneakers, and you can't see them. And they're dancing, you might see the lights might come on one couple, and then they're starting to do something over there, and then it lights are out, and then it goes on, flashes onto somebody else, and then somebody else might move through something or bring something onto the stage, and it scratching and crawling and jumping and leaping into space, and then lights go out and it's dark, and so the poor dancers don't know. It's dangerous for them because they're jumping out into the darkness and they can't see the floor, and they're trusting their instincts, and the lights are moving, and it's loud and assaulting. And if you've ever seen the Rite of Spring, which was also had this kind of intense tension held kind of piece, that was a piece that there was the audience like revolted, and there was actually a riot at the first opening concert of the Rite of Spring. And this piece, Winter Branch, is similar. It has the same kind of effect on audiences. And if you ever go to a Cunningham performance, audience members often walk out of the concert because, of pieces like this that just feel assaulting, or they don't know what's going on, and there's no like emotion going on stage. It's so sometimes it's tough. This piece, Variations 5, is an interesting piece where it talks about it. It's a hint to John Cage's and Merce Cunningham's interest in technology, and Cage put these photosynthetic cells all over the stage, and dancers, as they move through the space, they trigger these cells and cause sound to happen. So the dancers are actually creating the sound score as they move through the space. So it's going to be a different sound every time it's performed because the dancers aren't always doing the same thing in the same time. So the piece can be very random in that way. Another piece, Canfield, is a piece based on the game of patience. There's like 13, the dancers prepare 13 possible movement sequences, from which a certain number are chosen for each performance. And they don't know which ones they're going to do until they just go on stage. You're going to do number 7. You're going to do number 14. Number 13. You're going to do number 6. You're going to do number 12. And they mix them up like that. And so they have their own pathways, and so they know these pieces, and it's put together differently every time. This other piece called Points in Space, that's an important work. It's sort of inspired by Albert Einstein's statement that there are no fixed points in space. So the way you think about that, wow, no fixed points, nothing is stable, nothing is still, everything is in motion. The planets, the atoms, like from the macro to the micro, everything is in motion. And there is no front, if you think about it. There's no designated front. And so in this piece, it's a piece that was filmed and shot in London. It was really made for the camera by the BBC, and it was shot on a big scene stage. And it's this really fascinating work of choreography where the camera goes into the dance and is taken right into where the people are dancing. It's beautiful work, and the sound score was called This Voiceless Essay by John Cage. He took the consonants in the words. He had written some essays, and he just he extracted from his reading of those words just the consonants, and then synthesized those things together, so it creates this it sounds like that. It sounds like a kind of, kind of an interesting scratchy sand-like kind of sound that came out of it. It's really pretty fascinating. But so I've linked this in the online, so I hope you will take the time to watch that as well. And I think I wanted to show you some of those pieces. I think we're done here. Yeah. Oh, we're going to go on to Paul Taylor. So this is the end of this work today. I'm going to stop here. Boom. Before we move. And thank you very much for today. Please watch the videos. Please read some of the writings from Merce. I think this is really fascinating work. All of these pioneers, all of these these second generation dancers and choreographers were really fascinating. And so I hope you'll give them the time and take a look at the rest of it. Thank you so much. Take care.